Hi, and thank you all for being here on this chilly morning. I know it wasn't easy to make the decision to get here, so I appreciate your doing that. The name of my piece is Honoring the Independent Web, Finding Our Way Back to Kinship. For decades now, my favorite UU principle has been the seventh, because it promotes care for the independent web of all existence, which I've considered the most all-encompassing, spiritually moving, and practically challenging of all the principles. The revision of Article 2 in our bylaws last year expanded the text and made the challenge more specific. Our first shared value now reads, "We honor the independent web of all existence with reverence for the great web of life, and with humility, we acknowledge our place in it. We covenant to protect the earth and all beings from exploitation. We will create and nurture sustainable relationships of care and respect, mutuality and justice. We will work together to repair the harm and damaged relationships." I believe that if we take that value seriously and accept its challenge, it provides a path toward a better, more fulfilling relationship with the rest of the world. Too many of us, though, have only scratched the surface of what it calls us to do. Most of us tend to think of this web of existence abstractly, as a more or less conservationist view of nature, of air, land, and water, or more concretely, of trees, rivers, and wildlife. I think most of us do consider these aspects of the natural world and try to protect them. But that's only one way to think of the human-nature relationship, one that I believe is overly limited in scope. There seem to be three primary perspectives that describe the human-nature relationship. The first is human-centered, known as the speciesist or dominionist model. Dominionism is a term coined by Jim Mason in his book, An Unnatural Order, and it refers to the mindset that humankind is separate from and above the rest of nature, which is seen as a resource that people are entitled to use however we wish for our own purposes. The second is the stewardship view, which considers humans an integral part of the ecosystem, with us as its caretakers. This is the perspective that seems to guide most of us worried about the harm and dominionism has inflicted on the natural world, such as the existential crisis of climate change. This attitude is still distancing, though, because it locates us as nature's managers as we oversee and guide its processes. The third view is the indigenous or kincentric model, described by Enrique Salmon as operative when, quote, "People view themselves as part of an extended ecological family that shares ancestry and origins. It is an awareness that life in any environment is viable only when humans view the life surrounding them as kin, with humans as one aspect of the complexity of life, at an equal standing with the rest of the natural world. They are kindred relations, and it is understood that a person who harms the natural world also harms himself." For me, this perspective captures the spirit of our seventh principle and the first shared value listed in our bylaws. For decades now, our culture has seen increasing movement from the human-centered view towards a stewardship view. But there remains a strong indication that most of us are still lodged, at least in some respects, in the dominionist model. And that's what I want to focus on today. The approximately 10 billion land animals killed annually for food in the United States, 99% of whom are raised on factory farms. Factory farming and the prevailing dominionist attitude don't accord with respect and honor for the independent web of all existence, or with our covenant to protect all beings from exploitation. And there are wide-ranging consequences of this schism between us and our animal kin. One is that the natural environment is being raised, plundered, and toxified by factory farming to an almost unimaginable degree. There's no rectifying the damage we do to the planet's various ecosystems as long as we're bulldozing huge swaths of land to feed billions of animals and funneling the Earth's resources through them, then releasing the immense quantities of waste they produce, contaminating our land, air, and water. Another consequence of our dominionist thinking that traps animals in a system that regards them only as meat, as commodities, is that these animals suffer short, miserable lives and brutal deaths. Horrendous conditions are the rule in factory farms, where the methods required to transform animals into meat on such a large scale result in pain, fear, and maddening social deprivation. Many of them experience being outdoors for the first time in their lives when they are loaded onto slaughterhouse-bound trucks, taking them to their nightmarish deaths. But our denial of kinship with these animals harms us humans too. As Mason says, quote, "The price of our supremacy is a very deep break in our relationship with the living world around us," end quote. Denying or devaluing so much sentience, we experience only a fraction of the richness and sense of complex interconnection we otherwise would. It limits our engagement with the full web of existence that, when we're in touch with it, gives us a sense of belonging within it. Also, curtailing our empathy constrains our spiritual grounding and restricts our moral development. It hasn't always been this way. Prior to the development of an agricultural way of life, when our ancestors still foraged and hunted for food, Mason says, quote, "Food and materials came not by working the soil, not by controlling the lives and growth of plants and animals, but by incredibly detailed knowledge about them," end quote. Primal people's close observation revealed many similarities between humans and our animal cousins, so that they, in Mason's words, regarded our animal cousins not as inferior beings, as we now do, but as other kinds of people with villages and languages of their own. Then foragers became farmers and hunters became herders. Mason describes it like this, quote, "Domestic animal husbandry brought about an unsettling of very old and deeply held ways of seeing animals and human beings in the natural world. The unsettling process took centuries, of course, but it eventually destroyed the older, primal view of the living world that animal and natural forces in awe. Centuries of animal husbandry," he says, gave humans, quote, "conscious control over animals and their life processes. Castrated, yoked, harnessed, hobbled, penned, and shackled, domestic animals were thoroughly subdued, disempowered, made docile by confinement, selective breeding, and familiarity with humans, end quote. Their steady use and abuse of animals cyclically necessitated the denial of humanity's kinship with them. That shift, Mason says, resulted in the reduction of animal cousins from animated, ensouled, kindred beings in nature to frozen symbols of power over nature. And that's more or less where we are today. This history suggests that our radical separation from so much of the living web is not our fault. We're born into a dominionist pattern of thinking and behaving through the institutions we learn within and from those around us who were also born within them. Social psychologist Melanie Joy coined the term carnism to refer to the complex of assumptions about animals, our world, and ourselves that underlies meat eating. She explains, quote, "What we consider normal is, in fact, nothing more than the beliefs and behaviors of the majority," end quote. She notes that carnism is reinforced by what she calls the 3 N's of justification, the proposition that eating animals is normal, natural, and necessary. The 3 N's, she says, essentially act as mental and emotional blinders, masking the discrepancies in our beliefs and behaviors toward animals and explaining them away if we do happen to catch on, end quote. A corollary to the ideology that eating animals is simply natural, normal, and necessary to our health is that any competing view, like vegetarianism or veganism, is considered radical, peripheral, and illegitimate. Carnism, Joy says, is both a social system and a psychological system. She identifies 3 psychological processes that internalize carnism: objectification, de-individualization, and dichotomization. The first, objectification, is viewing a living being as a thing rather than appreciating that it has an existence beyond our purpose for it. This process is advanced by institutions such as the media and advertising, schools, corporations, and government agencies like the USDA. Our laws are hugely instrumental. First, they classify animals as property. And while there are some legal protections for companion animals, farm animals are exempt. There is the Humane Slaughter Protection Act, but it covers only the slaughtering process in the last moments of their lives. And even that minimal protection doesn't apply to chickens, other birds, or fish. The second process that internalizes carnism is de-individualization, the abstraction of animals by viewing them as only a collective group, as flocks and herds, for example, rather than as individual animals with distinct personalities, characteristics, and qualities. When Sprig the pig, in this morning's story for all ages, is given his name, he is individualized. He is uniquely himself, no longer de-individualized as merely fodder in the food system. The third internalizing process is dichotomization, the classification of groups into value-laden categories. For example, we psychologically separate pets from wild animals and farm animals, and the edible from the inedible. This dichotomization is what is violated when we think of animals eating cats and dogs, even though objectively, our pets are just as different from us as farmed animals. All 3 of these psychological processes are reinforced by the way most of us get our meat, dairy, and eggs. We buy cuts of meat on styrofoam, plastic-wrapped trays, and our milk and eggs are neatly arrayed in packaging that obscures any connection to living animals. They can't be made more abstract than that. Still, the system that enables carnism relies on invisibility because, as Joy says, quote, most of us, even those of us who are not animal lovers per se, don't want to cause animals, human or non-human, to suffer, especially if that suffering is intensive and unnecessary. So violent ideologies depend on physical invisibility, and their violence is well hidden from public scrutiny. Although we breed, raise, and kill billions of animals per year, most of us never see even a single part of the process of carnistic production, end quote. These psychological processes, aided by invisibility, interfere with our identification with the animals we eat. Our sense of kinship with them is severed. Mason describes the consequences to us of that separation this way, quote, what could be a more loving, whole human spirit is maimed. What could be a greater sense of kinship, of belonging in the world, is cut off. Consequently, our feelings for the world and life in it run more to the negative pole than the positive. We feel disenchanted, despirited, and disillusioned, end quote. Our UU values call us to find our way back to kinship with all the animals with whom we share existence. Each one of those billions of factory-farmed animals is a discrete, living, unique being, capable not only of suffering, but also of relationship. Consider not only what we do to them, but also what we miss out on by denying our kinship with them. It makes all the difference in the world. Once I truly felt my kinship with other animals, the processes that enable carnism stopped doing their work. I stopped eating my kin, and the world suddenly teemed with consciousnesses, with my fellow beings. That was in 1989, and I've never looked back. Kinship makes claims on us, though. Our shared value of interdependence requires changes that might seem difficult at first, but they become easy, second nature. First nature, actually. And our UU bylaws declare two additional UU values that are applicable here. One, first, justice. Quote, we covenant to dismantle racism and all forms of systemic oppression, end quote. As Mason argues, our cultural oppressions, including racism and carnism, share the same source, dominionism, which is the enemy of kinship, equality, and the interdependent web of all existence. Second, the value of transformation. Quote, we covenant to collectively transform and grow spiritually and ethically. Openness to change is fundamental to our Unitarian and Universalist heritages, end quote. Since I began speaking to you, 320,000 factory-farmed animals have died in the United States, either from slaughter or from the insufferable conditions they live in. If that disturbs you, you might consider this moment an opportunity. As M. Scott Peck has said, quote, the truth is that our finest moments are most likely to occur when we are feeling deeply uncomfortable. For it is only in such moments, propelled by our discomfort, that we are likely to step out of our ruts and start searching for different ways or true answers, end quote. Thank you.